Hey Jay,
Hey.
we're going to talk about empathy and being an empath today.
Okay.
I think this might end up being more than one episode,
It's a broad topic.
and we have a lot to say about it.
We do.
And it's not all bad. Like, we're not going to ruin empathy for you, but trust me, like, we both identify as highly empathic people. But I just get like a lot of things in this industry. I get really annoyed when people misrepresent it or
Mhm.
make it out to be something it's not, or something we'll talk about in the episode, sort of assign it a moral high ground it doesn't
Mm.
deserve.
Yeah.
So we're going to straighten all that stuff out. We're going to talk about it, but we're also going to give you tips for managing it
Yeah.
because you're not taught that.
No.
So empathy is a difficult thing to manage. It's like a blessing and a curse to be a
Mhm.
highly empathic person.
Right.
So we want to discuss ways to get through that. And then we're going to do some myth busting. Did you ever watch that Mythbusters show?
Yes.
I loved that show with
I
the
bet
guy
you
with the
did.
crazy mustache.
I bet
It's
you
a very
did.
autistic show, right? So we're going to do a little of that at the
Mhm.
end.
Okay.
And go from there. So let's start with the definition.
Okay.
Let me see what you think. This is the best one I could find.
Okay.
And this is the definition I'm starting with of empathy.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The action of understanding, being aware of, being sensitive to, and vicariously experiencing the feelings, thoughts, and experiences of another.
Okay.
Pretty good.
Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty good.
Okay. So the word comes from a German word that I'm not going to attempt to pronounce.
Okay.
But you can look it up.
Mm-hmm.
And it was coined in the late 1800s, which I was surprised.
Yeah.
Because that seems pretty late to coin a term that was clearly, like, we must have been referring to it as something else.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
I couldn't find what that was.
Right.
But, and that broadly translates, that German word, to feeling into.
Okay, that makes sense.
I kind of like that because that is sort of the closest, even with that definition, if you were to say, like, just give me a couple
Mhm.
words, feeling into something else or someone else's experience, I think is
Mhm.
very accurate for empathy.
When I was in high school, I remember learning the definition,
Mhm.
like just in like an English class.
Yes.
And I always stuck with me, probably because I had a lot of empathy and didn't realize it at the time.
It struck a nerve.
It
maybe.
always stuck with me that the way whatever teacher it was explained it, that sympathy is being able, like, trying to imagine what something would be like,
Mhm.
and empathy is the experience, is like having experienced it or like knowing the feeling of something.
Yes.
So it's not like just being like, oh, that must suck, but like, oh, that sucks.
Absolutely.
Right.
I wrote that down as one of the things that I wanted us to differentiate for people, because a lot of people use sympathy and empathy like interchangeably,
Right.
and that is not correct.
Correct.
So the way you're explaining it is perfect.
Mhm.
I think of sympathy as like compassion, like having
Yes.
compassion for someone
Like,
else.
yes.
And when you have empathy, you can also have compassion. But to me, empathy is more of a perspective thing. It's more of like,
It's
I'm
an
not
understanding.
yes, and
Right.
it's not like, oh, I feel bad for you, so I know exactly what you're
Right.
going through. But it's an ability to sort of put yourself in someone else's shoes.
Yes.
And feel that. And for most people who are very dialed into empathy, you're not trying to do that. In
Right.
fact, you're probably trying not to do that
Mhm.
because it's just something that happens.
Yeah, you're doing it naturally. You're
Exactly.
naturally imagining what that would feel like to you.
Exactly.
Right.
It's
Right.
instinctual.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're
I
not
mean, I
like,
do think you can teach it to someone. I think you can model it for kids. You can model it for other people. You can explain like how to try to feel for someone else or
yes.
put yourself in someone's shoes. But I do think a lot of people are just naturally dialed into that.
Absolutely. And, speaking of teaching it and increasing it, the reason that you can do that is because, like all the things we talk about, empathy is also a spectrum.
Yes, exactly.
So you are born with a certain amount of empathy, but you can then increase it. You can maybe, I'm not sure you can decrease it, but maybe you can manage the experience
right.
a little bit more. So there is that ability. But the thing that people get a little twisted is that, like, not everyone is born with the same amount of empathy or the same capacity for empathy.
True. And I would probably put money on the fact that the spectrums of empathy and emotional intelligence are very much correlated.
Absolutely. And that's one of the things I wanted to bring up, because one of the sort of soundbite-esque sort of things you hear when you hear people criticizing sort of like the MAGA right-wing people, especially the ones that are being represented as not very intelligent. Like, oh, they're sort of said like these people don't have as much empathy. And where I do think that in some cases that could be true, what's also true is that if you have a large amount of empathy and a low amount of emotional intelligence, then your empathy can very easily be manipulated.
Oh, good point.
So that your empathy is just for people who look like you or people who are the same class as you, or sort of manipulated into believing that like it should be directed only over here.
Or what so-and-so tells me to have empathy for.
Yes.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So I think that in most cases, and like especially when you also add in intuition, where you have sort of people on the intuitive spectrum that have like a high capacity for that, and on the empathy spectrum they have a high capacity for that, you tend to see more emotional intelligence, because in order to manage those two things, you're going to need that. But there are people who, you know, they're saying, oh, they don't have a lot of empathy for others. They do have empathy. It's just manipulated because they don't have a lot of emotional intelligence. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I think usually I think they always correlate. Usually you see them together both high, but I do think that you can have someone low on the emotional intelligence spectrum.
That's a great point. I think if you have no empathy, you probably have a diagnosis of like psychopathy or something like that. But most people have this.
Exactly. And that sort of leads us into talking about the difference between empathy and intuition, because a lot of times people use those terms interchangeably and they are not the same thing.
Correct.
So I would say that the majority of very intuitive people that we know are also very empathic.
Yes.
The majority.
Yes.
But that's not everybody.
No.
You can have a large amount of empathy and a very small amount of intuition. I know those people. They're kind, they're givers. A lot of times they're humanitarians, but they just don't have a lot of intuition about things.
They're not tapped in.
No.
Right.
Okay. And then you see people who are on the other end of that. We love to talk about these people. They are highly intuitive and very low dialed on the empathy. And those, my friends, are cult leaders.
Those are the bad guys.
And they're good at being bad guys.
Yeah, exactly.
They're very good at manipulating people because they're so intuitive.
Correct.
And because they don't carry the sort of burden of empathy, of caring about how other people feel, or even being able to have compassion for another perspective.
Well, the empathy is what in a lot of us creates responsibility.
Yes.
Or like emotional responsibility, right?
Yeah,
so if you don't have a lot of empathy, but you have a large amount of intuition, you're going to be reckless about it. You're going to use it for yourself. You're not going to think about how it's impacting other people.
Exactly. And where I think you can, like you said before, you can model and teach empathy. It sort of is like physical flexibility. Like you're kind of born with a range. And you can get to the high end if you keep working at it, but like you're never going to be like a gymnast. Right. If you like, you know what I'm saying? Like so I do think you can increase that. I do 100% think that there's a nature versus nurture element to all of these things, where the environment you're raised in and the things that you go through play a part in your ability to connect to your own empathy. So there are other factors. I'm not trying to oversimplify it, but I do believe that you are born with some of these things.
I agree.
With a range. Okay. And I do think that it is genetic. I see a lot of like, oh, interesting.
It goes down the line.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Many, I'm going to say modern with quote fingers, day teachings. And by modern, I mean like the age of patriarchy.
Okay.
Have to do with having empathy, teaching empathy. Okay, so love thy neighbor is in the Bible. Right. The golden rule is treat others as you would want to be treated. Okay, so you see this over and over again. But what you don't see any of, I really tried hard to find something that wasn't connected to like a pagan fairy tale that was a lesson of how to manage empathy.
Right.
How do you deal with being very empathic? What does that look like? What does that mean? Why do you have all that empathy? What should you do about it? Zero of that. I find that to be very telling,
Exactly.
Because we both know that that's not the way it used to be.
No.
Okay, so I'm going to go maybe on a little bit about something in a second when we get to it, about how I think that looked in pagan times.
Okay.
But I do think it's very interesting that in patriarchal times, in most patriarchal religions, the teachings are about, let me teach you to care about other people.
Mm-hmm.
Not, so you care about other people. Let's talk about how to manage that.
Correct.
I think that says a lot about the people teaching or designing the curriculum.
Yeah, well, no, because it was used as a way to guilt trip people.
Yeah.
It was like, we want you to be able to think about other people so that you're always thinking about like if you're doing right or wrong.
Yeah.
Like the empathy is correlated to right and wrong.
So ultimately self-worth.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And intuition is, as we always talk about, is like where your personal power comes from.
Yes.
Like if you can tap into what you desire and what you want and go out and get it, that doesn't work for any patriarchal religion.
Right.
So like if we can keep you sort of cut off at the knees from your power, but always worrying about like, am I doing the right thing, quotes, right? Like the right thing, the wrong thing.
Yeah.
Really tapped into your empathy.
Yeah.
You're going to spend a lot of time worrying about the right and wrong thing and not like, is this what I want?
See, I think that's a really amazing point, because I was looking at it more of the perspective of like, clearly the people who are, meaning the white men with power, are not having a lot of empathy, which makes sense for people who would like colonize and pillage and like all.
Oh, right. Yeah. They don't think about who they're harming.
So they would need the sort of like, oh yeah, we should probably teach this, because they don't naturally have it.
But well, and we don't want people to do it to us. Like we want to stay in charge.
Which is not a very empathic way to think, right? Like, do you know what I'm saying? Like, that's not empathy. That's
That's manipulation.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. But what you're saying is that what's also true is that if you're going to keep control over people, you have them sort of drowning in the wrong elements of empathy.
Exactly.
And not going like, how do you feel that way? But then how do you manage that?
Right.
Instead, you just kind of get caught up in like, well, if I want to be worthy of, a nice afterlife, then I'm going to have to, treat my neighbor as though they're me or whatever.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I think that's an excellent point.
And you can ask any empath how that actually plays out. It ends in burnout and feeling like no one gives a shit about you.
Yeah.
And that's what you see in a lot of current day, like angry religious people. Yeah. Is that they've spent so much time being browbeaten by like this right and wrong concept, this heaven and hell concept, that they're pissed. Yeah. That like no one's thinking about me. Like I live in a world where I'm told I have to think about everybody, but no one's thinking about me, and I'm pissed. And so then that religion becomes weaponized.
Do you think that's like some of the root of the Karenism we see in white women today?
1,000,000%. Yeah. 1,000,000% that they're on their high horse because they know what's right and wrong. They'll feel empathy where they want to feel it. But like this coffee shop manager is not like having empathy for me and that I'm late for work.
So it's like weaponized empathy.
Right.
Yeah. That's an amazing point. I completely agree. So another thing about why empathy probably isn't taught to the masses as far as like how to manage it is that empathy, as far back as I could go, and again, this term wasn't being used in pagan times, right? Okay, but as far back as I can go in the teachings, this empathy is considered a feminine trait. Okay. Now, before we proceed here, you and I both get uncomfortable with the masculine and feminine energy thing because in current times it has trouble translating. But what was true back then is that it was genderless. Like there was no gender elements to feminine and masculine energy.
Can I have like a little sidebar here?
Please.
I ever just sort of put together something as you were talking. Is that I think that like squidginess that you and I have been feeling about like masculine and feminine and divine masculine and divine feminine, like it has felt wrong to us for so long. And I think now I'm putting together why. And it's because it's almost like we were sensing the beginning of the pipeline. And now that we're like a couple years down from it, we're sensing that like, oh, the other side of that pipeline that people are sliding down is into transphobia.
Yes, right.
It's like we started talking about like men and women and in genders, but it's really not that. Like we've said in other episodes, it's like different parts of yourself. It's different energies in yourself.
Yes.
But the white people in this industry that we're always talking about feminine and masculine, a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them now are down that pipeline spewing some really transphobic shit.
Yeah. Yep.
And I think like you and I were probably sensing like, oh, this isn't heading in a great place and I can't see where it's going, but now here we are.
Now we see it.
Now I see it. Like when you were saying it, I was just like, oh, because it's become transphobic.
Exactly.
Like
exactly.
It's now like, oh, you should be feminine. You should be masculine. When like you can actually be whatever you feel like you are. Like whatever feels great for you. It's all different for everybody.
Yeah. It's the taking down of the walls that make no sense assigned to gender. And like that gender has anything to do with worth or the kind of person you are, or that should matter.
Well, right. Exactly.
And the reason that they want to, keep those walls up is because there's a hierarchy there.
Well, right.
Of gender.
Right. Exactly.
So if you take that away, how are you going to say that, men are better than women or deserve more rights than them?
Right.
Right. So it's this complicated unpacking of this massive issue. Right. And like you said, people are, I keep saying weaponizing, but I think it's the right word, weaponizing these concepts to hurt other people.
Yeah. But I think like if you're listening to this and you feel like, no, Jamie, you are biologically male or biologically female. Okay. But if like 5 minutes ago, you were on board with us talking about spectrums of like empathy and emotional intelligence and intuition and autism, there's also a spectrum for like how you feel inside your body. Like, do you feel more feminine or masculine or neither or all? Yeah. Like everyone lives on spectrums and there's actually no like pinpoint grid where everyone is supposed to be. Yeah. You know what I mean? So like if you can get on board with empathy being a spectrum, think a little bit further and you'll get to the point where you're like, oh, yeah, this spectrum makes sense too.
Yeah. Lean into it. I mean, right.
What the fuck does it matter if someone else feels that way?
And listen, use your empathy here. Use your empathy. Because listen, it's not even that far of a stretch because I don't know any human being who has not felt restricted somehow by the assignment of their gender. Okay? Especially as a woman, because that's what I can relate to, because that's what I identify as. Yes. Okay? Like I can't represent men because I don't have that experience. But what I will say is like, our gender is like you're supposed to perform it in these ways, and then you're also inside the gender labeled a certain way, like you're supposed to be feminine and girly, and then like but you go do something masculine but you're not being feminine enough, or you're being too, and it's exhausting. So if you can relate to that,
like that's just like a very small little piece of it. If you have empathy for that,
then you've got to have empathy for all of it. Correct. Like you can't just
not just how it applies to you.
Yes. Right. Yes. I would also like to say that I had a mini epiphany that's not as deep as the one you had while you were talking. Oh, nice. And I realized that, the word you invented, squidgy. Yes. I realized that is just a term for when your claircognizance starts to act up.
Oh, really?
Think about it. We were feeling squidgy and we were like, we don't know why, but something doesn't like feel red right. Flagging us. Yeah.
Nice. Nice. That tracks.
Yeah, I love that.
That's cool.
Okay.
I don't know. I don't know what's happening.
So back to the gender element. I mean, the non-gender element of this. Exactly. When we're talking about masculine and feminine energy, it has nothing to do with gender. In fact, in pagan times, the whole way we look at gender is not the same. And it was not exactly the same across cultures, but like there was not this weird patriarchal element of assignment and sexuality and like those that you have to sort of suspend all of that to really be able to sit in masculine and feminine energy. So in some ways I understand why it's difficult.
It's just pounded into Americans like this binary.
Exactly. But if you were speaking of somebody who identified as male having a lot of feminine energy, you weren't insulting him because there was nothing like, just think about the idea of that.
They were morally neutral.
Yeah. Like it's like, oh, a man likes a girly thing. He must be lesser. Like you're saying that anything feminine is lesser than anything masculine. And that would have not made any sense to pagan ancestors. No. It's sort of like saying left and right. Like
yes, exactly.
You know what I mean?
Right.
It doesn't matter. So it was considered a feminine trait. And so when patriarchy gets a hold of things, anything feminine is villainized. Anything
Correct.
feminine is lesser. So the idea of empathy is not taught and not talked about for that reason.
Right.
Okay. Thank you for coming to that TED Talk.
Yeah, well, and you'd also be outing yourself
Yeah.
as not walking the walk.
Yeah.
Right? Like if you're teaching people, if a governing body, whatever that was or is teaching people about empathy and then how to use it and manage it, those people are then going to look around and be like, hey, you're not doing that. You're colonizing. You're genociding.
Yes.
You know what I mean? So it's like just keeping the information hidden.
Yes. Well, when you unpack one part of it, you have to take all of it up.
Right.
You can't just pick and choose the parts that work for you.
Right.
And people find that to be daunting. And listen, it is. It is. It is, but it doesn't give you the right to not do it.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. So I have a dissertation. Like I literally wrote the word dissertation.
Nice.
But I think we should take a quick break to prepare the listeners for my dissertation. And we'll be right back.
All right, Heather. You know what I'm obsessed with?
I'm really excited to see what it is this week.
Myself. Can you believe it?
Yes, I'm obsessed with yourself too. In what element are we obsessed today with yourself?
I might be leading you down the wrong path.
Oh.
First of all, you're going to hate this.
Oh no.
I went and got a pedicure.
Oh, well, I'm happy for you that you got a pedicure.
You hate a pedicure.
I can't, I have a lot of trouble managing it.
There's some sensory issues around pedicures.
Just a little, yeah.
But I went and got one because my daughter's graduating from high school.
I can't believe that your daughter is
I can't
graduating.
either. It's actually...
Didn't you just graduate from high school?
Yeah.
So how do you have
Recently,
a child?
recently, yes.
A few years ago?
But so I went and got a pedicure. And you know what I didn't do?
What?
Shave my legs. And you know what I didn't do? Feel bad about it.
Good.
Normally, like, I'm serious. A couple of years ago, I would have like gone home and shaved my legs. Like I barely had any hair on my legs.
Yeah.
And I was like, I literally thought to myself, you're allowed to exist.
Yes, you're allowed to just let the hair on your body grow if you'd like to.
And guess what? That lady didn't give a shit.
She definitely did not give a shit.
No.
She touches boys' feet and they have hair on their legs.
Exactly.
Let me ask you another question.
What?
Did you check your toes to see if there was any like really long hairs on them?
No, I don't have that.
Okay. Did you put your glasses on to make sure?
Yes. No, I that didn't happen.
Okay.
It was a delightful experience, and I was really proud of myself for something that's like so seemingly kind of silly, but important for women, I think. Like, I almost didn't bring this up. I was like, Jamie, this is sort of a stupid thing to bring up on an Obsessed segment, but...
No, I don't think it's stupid at all, because there's this idea that everyone is going to judge you in this way that you're not judging anyone else.
Exactly.
And so to be able to sort of fight back and push back and have like little victories, I'm not trying to diminish it, but like
it is
in
a
like you weren't like, you know, slaying a dragon,
exactly.
but like you're actually, those little victories build up into something that makes you just feel more at ease existing.
Right.
Like taking up space. Here
Right.
I am.
And that's what you and I talk about all the time on these episodes, is like the thing that like changes you isn't this moment where like an angel comes down and that'd be cool.
It would be awesome,
but like,
it doesn't work that way.
You know, and like, you know, like you always say, a feather floats down or whatever. Like it's when you're doing the work little by little, and it's like those moments when you're like, oh wait, I don't give a shit about that anymore, or that doesn't like completely overwhelm me in anxiety, or I'm not like completely upset by this. You're like, oh, that's what the work is, and that's how you see that it's getting better and you're getting better.
Yeah. And you know, sometimes the work isn't always a victory. Like sometimes the work might have been that you did go home and shave.
Right.
But you noticed.
I was even aware of it.
I was aware that I did it, and I was aware of the feelings, and I'm going to deal with it. That's also a victory. It's not as big of a victory as being like,
but that's how you get there.
That's how you get there. You and I were also discussing, I can cut this if it's TMI, but like feeling okay sweating.
Oh, yes.
Like,
oh my God, how dare I?
And not even, to me, it's not even like someone else sees me sweating. It's just the fact that I am perspiring.
It's like this bodily process that you have no control over. Like
that you're supposed to do.
Sweat.
Yeah.
And I was sweating in a chiropractic appointment. Yeah. I literally had like heat.
Yeah, it was
like blankets
very hot
on me. It was
very
intentionally hot for the muscles.
And you walked upstairs.
I walked to the place.
Yeah.
It's like, how dare I sweat? How
Oh,
dare this person see me having a bodily function? Like that's
right.
how,
And a chiropractor, like a medical professional.
that's when I said that like the binary is pounded into humans, but women in
Yes.
particular,
Yes.
like that's what I mean. That like
Yes.
I feel like as a 44-year-old woman,
Yeah.
that it's like not that it's like gross for someone to
Yeah.
see me sweating.
Yeah. I used to wear, so I get sweaty lower back.
Mm.
My lower back decides to pour all of the sweat
Yep.
that anyone in the room is feeling. It comes out in my lower back. I used to, in very hot weather, wear like an extra tank top purely to absorb that. And I would be more hot and more uncomfortable.
Sweaty. I know.
And it's so silly to think about, but like even now, like I'll feel like, oh, and I'll think like, oh God.
Yeah.
And I'm like, if I notice somebody in warm weather, even if it's not warm weather, and their back is sweaty, I don't think a single negative
No.
thought about them.
No.
Why am I imagining that everyone in the room is going to start like throwing tomatoes at me or like kick me out? Like
Exactly.
it's so strange.
But you're allowed to exist.
You're allowed to not shape your legs and let people see it, possibly touch it.
Right.
You're allowed to sweat.
Yep.
You're allowed to all of it. And you know what? Go out and fight the good fight every day. You're going to win some, you're going to lose some. But let's hope you win more than you lose.
Exactly.
Okay, Jay, are you ready for my dissertation?
Yes.
Okay. So the reason I'm saying this is my dissertation is because I don't have any proof of this.
Okay.
This is based on my own study of pagan tradition and pagan culture.
Okay.
And I want to see what your thoughts are. I already know that you agree with this because we've talked about it before, but if you have any additional things to add to it.
Okay.
I believe that people who were empathic in pagan times were protected better. Okay. So when you learn about the different roles of people, especially like in the higher ups of courts or tribes or clans or whatever the word is for the correct culture.
For whatever culture you're talking about,
Yes.
which is all pagan cultures. That just means before patriarchy.
Exactly. What you would see is in those courts were specific jobs, and they weren't labeled like astrologer or empath or something like that, but they would be like, and again, different in different cultures, there would be like a high priestess, or there would be a seer, or, there's all these different terms.
Correct.
Okay. Well, a lot of the people who were doing intuitive work or who were sitting with people and doing some sort of work that required a large amount of empathy, including healers. Okay. A lot of those people were cloaked, meaning you couldn't see their face.
Gotcha.
Okay. And the reason for that, this is my dissertation. This is my belief. This is not, you can't find this proven in a history book. I welcome disagreement in your own thoughts. I believe that was for the ability to protect their anonymity so that they could have plenty of alone time.
Oh.
Okay.
Okay.
I believe that the people who were out there helping people, who were healing people, who were channeling messages, who were doing this kind of highly empathic, highly intuitive work, were protected identity-wise so that they could just go exist without being hounded for it, without being the one who said that, without being the person who messed that up or did it right. Yes. That's what I believe to be true, because there's really no other thing that makes sense to me as to why we would have cloaked all these people. Okay. So that's why you see, even like on tarot cards, when you get someone who is some sort of like ancient psychic, they had their faces covered in some way.
And do you think they did that, or like the people who are benefiting from it, like the theoretical, like kings and queens or whatever, were they doing it?
I think it was just an understood way to protect the people who do that work. Okay. So even just think about how, like, somebody who is in the business, like they're a top surgeon or something, and they save people's lives. They like operate on people with cancer and save them all the time.
Right.
If you were in like a village, and there was like even just 100 people in that village, and that was the person that did that, imagine what would happen if that person was just walking around.
Right.
So the people they didn't save, the people they did, like the complication that you put on that life of sort of like a fishbowl kind of fame.
Almost like a pre-celebrity.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I believe that they did that because people who are very empathic need more space from other people than people who don't. And I believe we just knew how to protect people. So I don't think it was necessarily a decree from the king or the queen or whatever the leader of
Right.
the clan, tribe, whatever was. I think it was much more just an understanding of empathy.
Like a respect.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Like a boundary.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
I think sometimes when you see like, why do they have those people who are like town criers in England come up in the ancient garb?
Yes.
Because you're not going to recognize them when they're walking around somewhere else because
Right.
you're distracted by like, there's a reason for the original sort of pomp and circumstance to those
That's
things.
a great point.
Okay.
Yep.
So my reason for giving this dissertation is that I think we've lost all of that.
Yes.
And so we now live in a culture where anyone who is involved in any sort of empathic thing, and I'm including doctors and nurses and teachers and anyone who has to care for other people in some way,
Yep.
rescue workers, first responders, all of those people, we don't protect their empathy at all.
No.
In fact, a lot of times, like we were saying before, we manipulate it, we weaponize it, and then we turn and we go, well, why are they so unhappy?
Right. Why are you burnt out?
Yeah.
Right.
And in fact, the lowest paying jobs in our culture are caretaker positions.
Yep.
So that just shows what we've done with that.
Exactly. That's a great point.
Where I believe, again, part of my dissertation, my belief is that back in pagan times, the most celebrated people were the most empathic people.
I agree.
Okay. Those were the actual leaders. That's who you wanted as a leader, was somebody who was highly empathic.
Right.
You also wanted them to be emotionally intelligent. You also wanted them to be intuitive. But empathy was a real honored thing to have, to be.
I agree.
Okay. Let's talk too about what empathy needs, because this is not discussed either.
No.
Okay. So boundaries is going to be my second one we get to. So before anyone's like, wait, they need boundaries. Absolutely they do. But something that's not talked about is that empathy needs output. Okay. So it needs a channel. It needs to go somewhere. It needs some kind of action.
That's a great point.
Okay. And the action, there can be anything. And I want to put an asterisk with this. So I'm going to say it and then I'm going to go back to it. People who are trying to deal with and channel a large amount of empathy, it's best done when it's done like, so that the thing they're channeling goes to other people.
Yes.
Okay. So for example, if you were like, oh God, I'm feeling a lot of empathy, how I'm going to process this is like, I'm just going to go for a run, or I'm going to take a break from social media. Like those things might be good to do, but they're not going to actually help your empathy.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
They're great boundaries. Go for the run. Take a break from social media if you need it.
Yep.
But you're going to still have that empathy that is, to me, empathy is like an input, right?
Yep.
That's going to still sit on you.
Correct.
It needs some sort of channel that's sort of action-based, not just for yourself.
That's a good point.
Okay. So it's best if it directly supports other people, but it doesn't have to be like you go out and like hand dollar bills to homeless people, which I think you should do that. But do you know what I mean? Like you could write something, you could speak out, you could share something, you could, like there's a million different things you could do. You could make a piece of art that like represents it. Like it's just something that other people can intake and connect with you in the process.
I think this might be why empaths. I don't like that word anymore.
I don't like it either, because what you're saying, what you mean is people who are highly
empathetic,
attuned to empathy.
Right.
Okay. Yeah.
But it's like been co-opted now. It's like people make fun of you. Oh, like you see like a Saturday Night Live skit, like, she's an empath. Like it's just embarrassing.
I agree.
But I think that's why people who are empathic might become like fixers.
Yes.
Or martyrs.
Yes.
Is because that it's looking for an expression
yep.
out of their body, and they don't know what else to do with it besides like running into the situation and like fixing it for the person that they're feeling empathy for.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Which in turn takes away their empathy.
And their power.
Yeah. Fixing somebody else is not an empathic response.
It's not. But I think it sometimes feels like the best way to make yourself feel better about something you're feeling badly about.
100%. I think when you, and listen, I'm not trying to sound like I have any high ground here. Like I have done this before. I don't know any empath who hasn't been guilty of this before,
Right.
of like running in to fix a situation for
Yeah.
somebody. But a true empathic response is to support the person through the thing and like be in
Yes.
tune with what they're needing and they're asking you for or not asking you for.
Right.
That's what a true empathetic response is.
Mhm.
But when you are not able to channel your empathy, like you don't have good systems in place in your body, in your life to deal with the high amount of empathy you're taking in all the time,
Mhm.
it comes out like you're talking about where you just come charging in and try to
Right.
fix something
Save
and you're
the
not
day.
paying
Right.
attention.
Mhm.
And that is, I think, a response to just like holding on to too much of that empathetic input.
I agree.
Yeah. I think it's tough.
Yeah.
So I think finding your way to manage it is
Mhm.
important. And I don't think that way is always the same.
Mhm.
Okay. And I'm not trying to say that you shouldn't take a break from social media because I do think you should have boundaries with social media.
Yeah, we all should.
Okay. But I do think that if that's the only thing you're doing because of your empathy, you're going to feel stuck.
Right.
Because that's not going to get that feeling out of your body.
Correct.
That energy is going to
it's still
sit.
there.
Yeah,
And
I'm like
it's-
going like this because it sits on my chest.
Right.
Literally.
And the knowledge of the thing that you're worried about or that you're feeling from other people, it's still in your body. It's still in
Yeah.
your mind.
Yeah, it's not going anywhere. That needs an output. So finding that is
Right.
very, very important. Okay, let's talk for a minute about boundaries.
Okay.
Let's talk for several minutes about boundaries. Listen, broken record. We have a whole episode on boundaries.
We do.
Please go
We talk
listen
about
to
them all
it.
the time.
If you have not listened to it, at the end of this episode, start it.
Mhm.
Find time in your life for it. It's very, very important. Very, very important. And
Yeah.
there's more detail there.
Yeah.
But the thing when it comes to empathy with boundaries is that in order to have the right kind of boundaries for empathy, you also need to have emotional intelligence.
Correct.
And if you see an empathic person very much struggling to hold up their boundaries, there's probably an element of emotional intelligence that they're lacking that you can gain. Emotional intelligence, unlike empathy and unlike intuition, is something you can go from having zero of to having more than anybody in the room. You don't
Right.
have to be born with that.
Right.
Right. But like, I mean, some people are, I think, just naturally. And I
Yeah.
think sometimes in different environments you're raised and you're taught it more.
Mhm.
But it's something you can educate in yourself.
Right.
Like I don't want to say easy, but relatively easy
Relatively,
fix.
yeah.
Yeah. So these boundaries for empaths are harder. And this is where people say like, you people please.
Mhm.
And that's true. But what I want to point out is that for people who are very highly empathic, it's very difficult to feel your own feelings when you're around someone who is feeling strong feelings themselves.
Or it's hard to differentiate which is whose.
Yes.
Whose feeling is what, if it's theirs or if it's yours.
Yes. And
That's hard.
And listen, it's much easier. I don't even think easy is the right word. It's much more comfortable
Mhm.
for an empath, believe it or not, to tune into someone else's feelings than to tune into theirs, especially if they're
Yes.
going, I have feelings about this, they have feelings about this, and then I have feelings about feeling their feelings.
Right.
It's a lot.
Right. But
It's
you take the personal out of it. It's not like whatever you can feel for them, but like the personal stuff is taken out of it. So it's easier.
Yeah, and the personal stuff should be taken out of it and reserved to the side for you to deal with later on your own. You
Right.
can't skip that part.
Correct.
Empaths love skipping that part.
Yep.
Myself included.
Mhm.
That's the hard part because like that's like we were talking about earlier with like your feelings about gender or something. Like
Yes.
that's when you have to go like, well, let me separate my feelings here, but let me now come back to them because I was uncomfortable when you were saying that.
Exactly.
Why?
Right.
Why might I have been uncomfortable? Who can I
Exactly.
talk to about this? Who can I
Right.
process this with? Who can I find out more information with?
Yep.
That's the hardest part. Empathy makes it more comfortable for you to just like tune in and analyze the person over there.
Right.
Like that's easier.
Exactly.
So that's why boundaries become so complicated because you're around somebody else. And especially if there's somebody you already care about
Mhm.
and they're having feelings, you're going to forget to have feelings or you're going to put your feeling way back there. And they're hard. It's hard to even pull them back up because that's so strong.
Right. Right.
And that's a very tricky thing to do.
Mhm.
Okay. So I'm going to give you a little scenario, and we mentioned this in our boundaries episode.
Mhm.
So if this clicks in with you, make sure you go listen. You know, if you've already listened to the boundaries episode, go listen to it again.
Yeah, we should all listen to it.
Okay.
Yeah.
But what we do in the boundaries episode also is like teach you how to put people in different boundary levels, which is not a ranking of how good of a person they are. It's a ranking of how much of your energy you can give to other people.
Right, exactly.
Yes. Okay. So one of my tricks for people who are, again, we don't love the term empath, but who are very highly dialed into empathy, highly attuned, is find a way to not agree to anything in the moment.
I know.
It is hard. It's hard.
I know, but it's so good. If you can do it, it's such a good like time buyer.
You need to buy time. Buying yourself time as an empath is 100%
because you need space.
You do. Okay. Because here's the scenario, and we use this in the boundaries episode. If someone came up to you and said, hey, can you help me move this weekend? Okay. Fuck. The person in front of you, especially if you can tell they feel overwhelmed or nervous about moving or like, oh my God, we need help. Like, this is crazy. As an empath, in that exact moment when you're being asked, the person's in front of your face. It's not a text. It's not a phone call. No. They're standing in front of your eyeballs.
Right.
You are going to want to say yes.
You're going to feel compelled to say yes. Even if you don't want to, you're going to feel compelled to say yes.
You're going to have a thought like, well, I have 10 million things to do, but I can probably squeeze in.
This person really needs my help.
Yes. Okay. Then you're going to leave the person and their energy is going to have left and you're going to be like in the car or going somewhere and you're going to have the oh shit moment of like, what have I just done?
Or be pissed. I'd be so mad.
Yeah, me too. Like, why did I just agree to that? I don't want to do it. I actually can't do it. And now you either have to go pissed or now you have to go. Which is not the
person's problem, by the way.
No, you have to go, actually, I can't. Which is horrifying in my opinion.
Well,
right?
Empaths don't like doing that.
No, because you already said you'd help and they just got happier based on it. And now you're going to take it away.
Yep.
Okay. So the trick is to come up with a way out. This is my trick. You can use it. I'm telling you, you probably have heard me do it to you. It's nothing personal. I do it to everybody. I do it to stuff I end up saying yes to. Okay. And it is, hey, could you help me move this weekend? Right. Oh my gosh, that's so exciting. You're moving. Let me check my calendar. I need to take a look at it because I'm not great at remembering it in my head. That's a lie. I know exactly what's in it. I know exactly. I just know I can't be trusted in this moment. I'm going to get back to you tonight. Okay. Yep. And I do get back to them tonight.
You do that for things that are even just like invitations.
Not
like asks.
Yes.
But invitations.
Always. Because I cannot trust myself in that moment to actually make a good decision.
Right. And again, it's not personal. It's not about me asking you.
Yes.
It's about you being asked.
And sometimes it's not just because I only want to say yes. Sometimes I already know it's a no. And sometimes I already know I have something to do. Right. But I want to do the no as kindly as I possibly can to you. So I'm going to buy myself a little bit of time to craft that.
That's nice.
Okay? Because it isn't just to get myself out of everything.
Right.
Okay? But what I need to do is go, what boundary level is this person in for my life? Okay? Right. And then depending on that, make the decision. But then you can also do the trick of finding a way to say yes with a no. Yeah. Empaths, this is the way to feel better about saying no. Yep. Okay, so here's an example. I can't help you move. I'm so sorry. I have blah, blah, blah going on this weekend.
Yep.
Okay, but I'm so excited for you. And like, again, depending on where they are in the boundary levels, let's say this is someone that you care about, but they're not like a number one, maybe not even a number two, right? Like what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually DoorDash some pizza to you guys at like 1:00. How many people do you think will be there? I'll send like 10 cheese pizzas over and like refresh the crew.
Perfect.
I just did something for you. I kept myself involved. I contributed. I found a way. And I said no, but I said yes to doing something. Okay. Yep. That's how empaths need to operate. Because just a no feels awful.
Yes.
And listen, if it's somebody you don't know, don't do all of that.
No.
Send them a card. Like with a gift card for their new house, like do something with the information that they're moving.
Yeah. And also a little cheat code for the empaths out there, which is something I've just finally figured out at my old age. And my kids have been in school for 1,000 years. Like, you don't actually need to always give an excuse.
No.
Or like you don't always have to give a reason, is what I
Right.
mean. Like
Yes.
even I just like called my son out of school, and for years,
Yeah.
he's in 8th grade.
Yeah.
Like for years I would have like sent the email and been like, we have this, we have that. I literally was like, he is not coming to school today.
Mm-hmm.
Send.
Yeah.
And you know what they said? Okay, thanks for letting us know. But like as like an empath, as a people pleaser, as whatever you want to call it, whatever word, we feel this like sense of obligation that we owe people everything. That's where the boundary comes in. I have finally learned to hold a boundary, and that I don't owe everybody every piece of like personal information of myself.
I think especially if you have sort of that trope of like good girlness and like being polite and all of that, like you are like literally trying to prove that you're not doing something wrong. Yeah, because there's this underlying feeling like you're in trouble all the time. And so you've got to prove it, right?
Yes.
But when you're the person, think about this. When you're on the other side of it and someone can't do something and they're like, I have to do this and then I have to go to do this. It sounds like you're lying.
Making an excuse. Exactly.
Yeah. But if you're just like, I'm so sorry, I can't make it to that, but here's what I can do. Or I'm like, can we follow up? Can we have coffee in a couple of weeks? Like that's a bare minimum. Like finding a way to do that. So it's not just like, no, I can't. That feels better. You have permission to be like, hell no, I'm not helping you move, bitch. Like absolutely. You don't have to be polite if you don't want to. But most very empathic people would feel uncomfortable if they weren't.
Correct.
Yes. Okay. So then I just have one more element to this, and then I think we're gonna wrap this episode up and come back with our myth busting, because I can like feel the spiciness to our myth busting. Okay. And then I actually have like a psychologist experiment that I want to talk to you about that has to do with empathy too. Okay. For our next episode. But I want to wrap this up by saying that empaths are often storytellers, very good storytellers, and I don't just mean like a writer. I mean they're in their own mind create amazing, complicated, sometimes ridiculous stories.
Yes.
Okay.
Can confirm.
Okay. This is really helpful when you learn to listen to it, learn to be aware of it, because in order to find these like vows we talk about where like your ego got stuck when you were a kid and couldn't find a way to safety and made up a story. In order to find those, you need to be a good storyteller to both find it, see it, and then to rewrite it. Right. So empaths, and listen, I do this with people. Empaths are the best at rewriting it because they're naturally creating stories about everything. Because think about empathy in itself is a way to see a story in another way.
And to connect with it and understand it.
Yeah.
Right. Yep.
Yeah. So that feeling is there. Like the reason that the question empaths always get to see, like, are you an empath? Is like, how do you do watching the news?
Oh, right.
Right. And like the reason for that question is to see if you'll answer like, oh, it hurts my heart to watch the news. Right. That's a sign of an empath, because what you're doing every time you see a sad story is putting yourself in the position.
Exactly.
Okay. It's why it's like, why are all these like sensitive, caring of other people, people all upset about Palestine? Well, because we can put ourselves in the shoes of people who aren't like us.
Exactly.
That's why. Right. Because it's not like we're choosing to care about it. We just hear about it and we do care.
Right. There are a lot of people who can compartmentalize it enough to be like, oh, that's over there.
Yes.
But people who are empathetic are like, what if that was my kid? What if that was me? Yes. What if that was my house that was being bombed? Or what if I was in the hospital having a baby and it was bombed? Like, you're putting yourself in the shoes of those people, whether you know them or not, whether it's here or across the globe. That's empathy.
Yeah. You and I talk often about how sometimes we feel bad for the bad guys.
Yeah.
And how it's like such a burden.
Right.
And I just feel like that's also showing you that like there's no moral high ground to empathy. Like empathy just is a thing that is a natural response to someone else having feelings.
That's why I've said it on another episode. That's why I can't watch Donald Trump.
Yes, because you feel bad for him.
Fucking loathe him, but he's such a bumbling idiot that when he's talking, my empathy kicks in,
Yeah.
and I get embarrassed for him.
Yeah.
And I want him embarrassed.
Yes.
And I'm like, nope, can't watch this because like I'll read about it, but
Yes.
like for me to physically watch him, I refuse to feel empathy for him, so
Yes.
I cannot like actually watch him.
Yeah, it's also why you can't deal with stand-up comedy. You have way too much empathy and for the room.
Yeah. What if they bomb?
Yeah,
oh my
yeah.
God. Oh my God.
Yes, like that's what that is, and
Yes.
it comes out in different ways for different people. In the next episode, we're going to talk about like some people are very highly empathic and they don't have empathy towards people.
Exactly.
They have empathy towards other things. We'll talk about that. So like it's different for everyone. There's not one way to be an empath. So, but I do think it's important to take in like the empowering part of it is that like you're an expert storyteller because it's easy for you to see other perspectives, or easier than for other people.
Right.
You probably also love to read. Probably love a book because that's just like jumping into other people's perspectives, and it's someone doing it for you, so you're not doing any heavy lifting. You're just letting someone bring you in, and that is very comforting to empathic people.
Yep, it sure is.
So let's come back next week,
and
we'll get even hotter and spicier about some myths and this psychologist from Yale's experiment and some of the interesting things I have to say about that.
Okay.